Welcome to Exploring Executive Function, How We Get Things Done.
And hello and welcome. Thank you, Emily, for sharing that information. If you are here to discover more about what executive function is, what types of executive function there are, and some supports that may have worked well in our households and might work well for you, some tips and examples of executive function, goals, and accommodations, you've come to the right place, and we are glad you are here to join us for this hour. Margarita, do you want to introduce yourself first? And Margarita, you are muted.
I just noticed that. Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Margarita Rodriguez-Curry, and I'm the parent mentor for the areas of Branch, Calhoun, Hillsdale, and Jackson County. I was able to join this webinar because I have a son that was diagnosed with autism at 18 months old. He's 12 years old now, and executive function was something that I had to teach him since very young age.
And thanks, Margarita. I am Stephanie Nicholls. I am the training manager for Michigan Alliance for Families. I also have a child that struggles with executive function. She has had an IEP since she was 3, and we have tried to figure out all sorts of different supports over the years that can help with some of that brain organization or how to break things down or how to get things done. And we've tried a lot of things that worked and a lot of things that didn't work. And I'm really excited to be able to share some of that information with you. So, Andrea, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank everyone for attending today. My name is Andrea Sargent, and I am the Regional Parent Mentor for Mason Lake, Oceana, Muskegon, and Newaygo counties. I myself have executive function, as do 2 of my 6 children, so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I hope to give a little insight about what works for me and my family today. And to get started, let's talk a little bit about what executive function is. It's a set of mental skills that let us plan, set goals, and get things done. We aren't born with these skills, but they can be taught and learned. As Harvard Center on the Developing Child says, our genes provide the blueprint, but the early environments in which children live leave a lasting signature. This is a really important thing to emphasize. Children aren't born with executive functioning skills, but they're born with the potential capacity to learn them. Executive function can be considered the management system of the brain, but I like to think of it as the brain's air traffic controller. The skills you learn allow you to take all of that tangled web of thoughts and ideas and impulses and direct them towards a safe and hopefully productive outcome. In my family, along with my 2 biological children, we all have issues with executive function, but it looks different on each of us. For example, my son and I have pretty great flexible thinking skills, but that's a skill my daughter is still developing. And sometimes another skill can somewhat mask executive dysfunction. Like my daughter, when she was going through evaluations, we learned that her verbal skills were exemplary, but she had a cognitive impairment in her executive functioning skills. So she literally could talk the talk, but couldn't walk the walk. Knowing how those skills work together and how they didn't helped us plot a course to develop her skills. As we learn and develop executive functioning skills, it can help us manage our daily life. Like most skills, from cooking to playing the piano, I'm constantly working to improve my executive dysfunction, and it's a good idea to keep those skills polished. And this leads us to the types of executive function, and Stephanie can help with that.
Thanks, Andrea. We started to dive in how we wanted to break this down, and the 3 of us all had information that was all kind of different, where we had researched on how we were supporting our own kids. And it's something that if you start to research executive function, you're going to find that different people define different types and that there is some overlap. And sometimes there's as few as like 4 types, and sometimes there's as many as 12 types. For the purpose of our conversation today, we're going to talk about these 8 types of executive function, just as how we're going to frame our thinking and how we're going to approach the topic and provide some examples and some concrete things for you to lean into as you're learning more about executive function. So the first one we're going to talk about is impulse control, which is really thinking before you act. And this is one of those skills that develops as we mature, and it doesn't exist or is really challenging for young kids. This is not something Andrea was talking about. These aren't things you're born with. They're things that develop over time, and part of it is maturity. So a lot of executive function or executive dysfunction issues start to reveal themselves as kids are maturing, kind of like that end of elementary school, middle school, high school range is when you really see that there's some need for executive function support. So impulse control is something that is really about thinking about the effect or the result of what you're going to do and really taking that pause and thinking about anything before you're doing it, that you're not just going. And it's something that's hard for all teenagers and something that's even harder for people that struggle with executive function. Emotional control is regulating your emotions and matching the size of your reaction to the size of the problem. Flexible thinking is really the ability to change your expectations or adapting when something unexpected occurs. So it's thinking of things in more than one way, that you're not totally off the rails, can't move forward when something has changed. You can think of another perspective or another option or another way to look at it. Working memory is keeping the information in your head that you need while you're doing something. So it's sort of like a mental scratch pad of the steps. And it could be as simple as, I tell my kid to go upstairs, get her purple shoes, and meet me in the car. And that's what's on her scratch pad is I need to go upstairs, I need to find my purple shoes because they could be anywhere, and then, oh no, what was I supposed to do next? Now I'm just going to sit here with my purple shoes. So that working memory is those steps, that scratch pad of information you need to keep handy. Self-monitoring is how we understand our behaviors and make changes in the future. So reflecting on what has happened and how we might make adjustments. So understanding ourselves and then what we can do to help ourselves or to make adjustments or changes. Planning and prioritizing is really thinking about what's most important and what should be done first, which goes hand in hand with task initiation, which is getting stuck because you don't know where to start. Like there's just no idea of where to begin and you can't move forward in anything because you're just stuck. You don't know how to get it going. And then our last type that we're breaking down today is organization. And this could be losing track of what you were thinking, what you came into the room for, where you put your keys, where the purple shoes are, or anything else. That we all rely on organization at home, in school, and life. And these are things that we all need to learn, and often they need to be like explicitly taught for young adults that are just building these skills. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of each of these types to help them get a little bit more concrete for you. As you have questions, do not hesitate. You have a questions area in your GoToWebinar panel. Go ahead and type questions in. We will check in periodically to see if there are questions, or at the end, if there's time, we'll address those questions also. Margarita, do you want to share your experience supporting your son with impulse control?
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, for explaining the types of executive function. Now let's talk about some examples that I have used at school that work for my child for impulse control. Sometimes our kids might not be able to notice that their behavior is getting a little bit out of control while they're in the classroom, like they're talking too loud, they're moving too much, they're just having a hard time concentrating. So like Stephanie said, they are not thinking before they are acting. So what we did for my child was that the teacher was able to realize when my son was getting a little bit out of control by raising his voice or wiggling in his chair. So she will give him a folder and he will have to take it to the office ladies. And by her doing that, it will allow my kid to get out of the classroom, go for a walk, talk a little bit, get all the wiggles out. And then once he was able to come back to the classroom, he was able to focus and he was able to pay attention to what was happening at class. And another example, because it's very important that the strategies and the things that we're applying at school, we can also use them at home to reinforce those skills. So what we did at home to help with his impulse control was that I had a designated area where I will take him to calm him down. When he was getting upset, I will take him to this corner where I had a rocking chair, and I will sit him on my lap and we will just rock him. You know, I will just rock him while he's like screaming and crying, and just give him time to calm himself down, do some breathing techniques, and, you know, keep him safe and keep his brother safe, you know, from his having a hard time controlling himself. And this is something that will help him calm himself, and then I was able to give him different skills, and that's something that we still do to this day. And his impulse control has definitely improved so much by applying these skills and doing it all over and over again. And as long as you're doing it at school and at home, it really creates a big impact in our kids. Andrea, can you share other different strategies that have helped your kids?
Yeah, thanks. It's along the same lines with my son when he was in lower elementary school. His teacher set up a system using colored cards to signal the need for a break. The system worked both ways. So if he was falling off task, his teacher would signal to him using the card as a non-confrontational or not embarrassing way to show him that he needed to refocus. And it was also used if my son felt himself getting kind of squirrely. He could signal to the teacher that he needed a break as a way for him to manage his impulses. But sometimes a kid needs something a little bit more concrete to help with their impulse control. My daughter is the kind of student who will impulsively speed through a test, filling in random answers if she feels like she's not completing it quickly enough. No matter how many times we've talked to her that it's not a race and that it's important for her to take her time, she still panics if she's only partway through and a student gets up to turn in their completed test. In fact, when she was only a few months post-op, she had to take the mandated state testing, and when her scores came back, it showed that there was a 70% drop in her math scores, which led to her teacher and I having some pretty significant panic for a couple of days, thinking that there was far more damage done than we initially thought. And then fortunately her teacher went and looked and realized that she had completed the entirety of the math section in 17 minutes. So now we always have her take her tests in an alternate environment free of distractions, and this has helped to curb her impulse to rush through those tests and get them done quickly.
Thank you both for those excellent examples of impulse control. Next, we're going to talk about emotional control, and you're going to find there's definitely some overlap between the two. You're going to find that throughout these different types that we're talking about. There's definitely areas that overlap. In talking about emotional control, like that break area where you can re-regulate and get it together, is going to be something that could support emotional control also. Kind of the starting point when we're thinking about how we support emotional control is identifying emotions in others, looking at pictures and being able to identify what they're feeling, being able to identify the emotions in yourself, that feeling your feelings is important and that you don't have to bottle them and that your feelings are valid, but figuring out what to do with them when you're feeling them, and making sure that we're teaching the response and the feelings are matching what's occurred. So if we have like a small, medium, or large problem, we're having a small, medium, or large response. Talking about that, like, you look frustrated, you feel frustrated, you know, how big of a problem do you think this was? Do you think it was small, medium, or large? We actually did this in my house. We used to do small, medium, or large, and then we evolved to a scale of 1 to 10. Is it a 10 is a catastrophic problem? The world will not keep spinning. We've never had a 10, thankfully. I'm glad. As you all know, the world is still spinning. But using those terms that make sense to your child wherever they're at in development or learning, to be able to apply, how do you match your response to what's occurred? I know someone else that does a scale of 5, and they they have a problem and there's a reaction and they pause and say, okay, is this going to matter in 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, or 5 years? And that's how they scale their response, and their emotional control is really taking that beat and saying, am I frustrated right this second? Am I mad right this second? Is it going to still matter 5 hours from now? Am I going to remember this 5 days from now? Just stopping and taking a moment to say, like, what am I feeling and why? Like, I am someone that totally gets hangry. It absolutely happens, and my family members know it and will point it out to me, and I will not be aware that that is what's like. They are making terrible decisions left and right. It's obviously not me, it's them. And when they point it out, they're usually right. My fuse just got shorter and I need to work on my emotional regulation. So looking at different coping strategies for emotional control, taking a break, taking a breath, taking a walk, having that space where you clear your head, or having that time where you say, is this still going to matter in 5 hours? Is this small, medium, or large? Is this a 7? Is this a 2? And having that vocabulary to be able to start to apply how you manage your emotions is a really good starting point. Margarita, would you like to talk a little bit about flexible thinking?
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Flexible thinking, like Stephanie mentioned, is about changing expectations or adapting when unexpected things occur. It's the ability to think of something more than one way, so that when change is needed, you can move forward. Sometimes our kids cannot do this, and it can be from making little changes to making big changes. For example, my son, even the simplest changes like will be a big deal for him. And one example that comes to my mind is that when he was 4 years old, he struggled when I will serve his food in a different plate, that it was not the Spider-Man plate and the Spider-Man cup. And at that time, he was not speaking, so I didn't know why he was having meltdowns. Why was he upset that I was feeding him? Like I didn't understand. And until I realized that it was because his food was in the wrong plate, because he wanted the same plate. He couldn't understand that it was okay to eat from a different plate. So he obviously did not have the skill of flexible thinking. And the way that I helped him with this was that I will still use the Spider-Man cup and the Spider-Man plate, but next to him, next to those plates, I will put a regular plate with the same food and everything, just so he could get used to seeing the plate, seeing that his brother was eating from a different plate, that I was eating from a different plate, and that it was okay. It was okay to make those changes. And because at the end, we all have to adapt and change and make adjustments. And this might come naturally for some, and some, like with my other son, I didn't have none of these issues. But then for others, they need explicit teaching. And for this, there comes a very great tool that is called social stories. And this can help develop flexible thinking. If you're not familiar with social stories, they explain situations and help them learn ways of behaving in specific situations. Life sometimes cannot be planned, and you just have to do your best to adapt.
Thanks for giving us some insight about flexible thinking, Margarita. Next up is working memory. And as a mom to 6, there's always a lot going on, and it can be a lot to remember. Our way of managing that is to have a very large family calendar in a high traffic area that we all walk past multiple times a day. It serves as a constant visual reminder of who needs to go where at what time. Each person in the house has a couple color-coded markers, so things for appointments like therapy appointments, orthodontist appointments are one color, and the other color is for work schedules or time where you will just be gone from the house. That way I don't have to remember everything if it's written down someplace. That helps.
We break that down even further in my house. So we have a calendar similar to that, that does not have as much on it because there's only one child in my house. But we do break down the steps that we need to get out the door. So like what you see on the screen is getting ready for school, and breaking down that I need to get dressed, wake up, get dressed, eat breakfast, brush teeth, put on my shoes, check my backpack, and go to school. We have similar visuals to this around my house that break down the steps that need to be completed to get something done. So it's not just working memory isn't just organizing your calendar, though that is a part of it. It's organizing what you have to get done. It's also thinking about that mental scratch pad. So if I need to get ready for school, I need to have brushed my teeth, put on seasonally appropriate clothes, made sure I have my homework, had some breakfast, take my medicine, and be ready for the bus at 6:58, which is sounding horrible at this point in the summer, to be out the door. And breaking down those steps is another way to support that mental scratch pad of working memory, where you have something concrete that you can lean into. That in my house, visuals work really well of what we need for support to make sure that we have all those pieces that need to come together. Because there's a lot of things that we kind of do automatically that our kids don't do automatically, that they need more support to do. And working memory is one area where you may see they need that support to have something to reference, something concrete to reference for that mental scratch pad. Andrea, I love your example of self-monitoring. Would you share it with us?
Thank you. My son with autism, he perseverated on certain things, and that would build into some pretty significant anxiety and anxiousness. And through the guidance of this fantastic book that you see on your screen, called Don't Feed the Worry Bug, it encouraged us to set aside a specific time in his day for his, quote, worry time. He could not and would not focus on things that bothered him throughout the day, and he would save them and pack them away for his worry time, making space to deal with it at a time instead of all the time. And as is sometimes the way of worrying, by the time his worry time came around, a lot of times my son would realize that whatever it was that had been bothering him, that he was feeding his worry bug, wasn't that big of a deal after all. And so that was like the next step in self-monitoring for him to realize that having a lot of anxiety about something maybe isn't really the thing you should do, because things have a way of working themselves out. As a side note, I would like to emphasize that is very important for this skill to be driven by the child. Sometimes parents, particularly parents like myself who also have executive dysfunction, I would allow things that would bother me to like roll over onto my son. For example, when my son first transferred to middle school, which is a tough transition, I worried every single day that he was going to get picked on for being the new kid. And so my way of checking in on that every day was to ask him who he ate lunch with. And every day the answer would be no one. And every day my heart would break a little bit and I would get real sad about that. And after about, I would say like 3 weeks of me asking him every day on the ride home and him saying no one, he had sensed my anxiousness or my upset, and he goes, "Mom, this isn't bothering me. Why is it bothering you?" And it made me realize I was feeding my own worry bug, and that maybe I needed to set some time apart so that I could worry about it not in his presence and like feed my worry bug in front of him. So it's really, yeah.
I think that's so hard as a parent, where you're like, I'm asking the question and I'm not trying to project anything onto you, and self-monitoring is about you, but how to get the full picture that you're looking for without projecting the emotion onto it so that they can feel their own feelings.
Yes.
So hard. I'm so proud of him for telling you that. That's
I was
fantastic.
honestly one of my proudest proud of my son parenting moments, that at 7th grade he was able to be like, "Hey Mom, this isn't a big deal for me. Why is it a big deal for you?" And it's like, why is it a big deal for me?
That's
so good time
self-advocacy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I would be very proud of that parenting moment also. Next, we're going to talk about task initiation. And working from like a to-do list can be a good starting point. What you see on the screen are what we use to support the to-do list in my house. Actually, it's from school. This isn't really from my house, but we support it also in my house. At school, at the end of the day, my child sits down with somebody that they recap her classes, they recap her subjects, and write down any homework that needs to happen at home. And part of what they do when they make that to-do list is they draw pictures that look like what you see on your screen. So these actually represent pieces of the hour. The one on the far left is 15 minutes. The one on the far right is 60 minutes, and there are different increments in between for how long they think it's going to take to do the task, to do the homework. And one of the things that we think is a big benefit to having this visual, well, you already may have caught on. We really like visuals in my house. They really, really support us. They make a huge difference that we have that to lean into. But we can look at our to-do list and say, oh, this one's going to take an hour, and I have an hour right now and I only have 20 minutes later. I need to get this one done first. Or we can look at our to-do list and say, I really want to get the shortest thing done first so that it's out of the way so that I can cross it off, because I get a ton of satisfaction from crossing it off and knowing something is done. So having the estimate of how much time it's going to take can really give you a spot to start. Breaking anything down into steps in different ways can also give you a starting point. So like I send my daughter to clean her room and I find her 2 hours later with every stuffed animal out and laying on her bed listening to music. I know it's happened to all of you. It's definitely happened to me more than once. And that is an executive function struggle for her, because cleaning her room is a big task that doesn't have a defined starting point if we haven't talked about it. She doesn't know where to begin to clean her room, so she went to her room and she probably started to put something maybe, but she didn't know how to tackle it. So she got and did something else. So she would stay out of trouble and out of sight and it would be fine. She didn't know how to break it down and how to start it. So if we're talking about task initiation, breaking down the steps can be a really great support. When I send her to clean her room, I want her to make sure all of her dirty laundry is in the basket, make sure all of her clean laundry is put away, make sure all of her books are in order on her shelf, make sure all of her toys are put away. There's specific toys that she sorts by, that the specific things all go together, they have their buckets. So that sorting piece is a separate piece of putting toys away in our house. And when she has a list or a visual or a structure for all the steps that needs to happen, she can choose one to start with. But if I tell her to go clean her room, she can't figure out where to start and she winds up stuck. So task initiation can be really tough for big tasks that you don't know. Like go do your homework is the same thing, where the visual on the screen helps us break down where we're going to start on our homework and how we're going to get it done.
And task initiation goes hand in hand with planning and prioritizing. But planning and prioritizing is a very individualized process. And the same method may not work for everyone. When my son was a freshman in high school, he happened upon the Cornell method of note-taking. His teacher showed it to him and it clicked for him, and it allowed him to follow a method that worked for him and something that he still uses to this day. The Cornell method is you basically line up sections on a piece of paper, and how it's been explained to me is like one section is just the brain dump. He would dump all of the information as it was coming in and put it all in one space. And then the next step is you go to the other section and you organize it and prioritize it. So you organize it by putting it in a summary. So you take all of that brain dump and you summarize it. And then from that summary, you prioritize it by picking out keywords so that very quickly he could look at that piece of paper and realize this is my notes about this particular topic. And then if that wasn't what he was looking for, he could switch to the new thing. It worked really, really well for him that his sister kind of modified that into a system that worked for her. So everything is very individualized, but once you find a method that works for you, it helps a ton. Chunking that's my personal favorite method. It allows you to break down huge tasks or assignments, like an assignment like a book report, or tasks like we talked about cleaning your room. I am the person that if I start out cleaning a room, will wander off into another room because I realized that I had something that I wanted, but I'm facing my whole house has drawers opened everywhere. So chunking it and being like, I'm just going to focus on the kitchen today, is a way that works for me. How I like to say to it is, if you stuff the whole brownie in your mouth, that's how you choke. So you break it up into bite-sized pieces that are easy for you to chew and swallow, in order to get your tasks done, and don't choke on them.
I still love, like I have used it multiple times since the first time I heard you say it, to not choke on the brownie. And I think it's so powerful just to carry around with me in my head of like, just do this, get it done. And like, oh, nope. How do I cut it up? How do I make it bites? How do I make it function? And how important that is to how you are able to plan and prioritize. I think
Nibbles.
it's a nibble of wisdom you have shared with all of us, and we appreciate it. Thank you. Our last type we're going to provide a couple examples of is organization. And same with what Andrea was talking about in planning and prioritizing. What works for me doesn't work for Margarita, doesn't work for Andrea, doesn't work for my kid. Like, this is so individualized, and it's going to take some testing to see what works for each person. You're going to try a bunch of different things till you find something that works. It's throwing some of the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. I personally am this picture on the right that has a paper calendar and a whiteboard calendar and an electronic calendar. I need to have multiple checks and multiple visual points where I can check in with to be able to stay on target for what I need to get done. I also have a to-do list that is unrelated to my calendar, but I have a lot of different tools that I use as an adult for my organization. I have a friend who struggles with executive function as an adult, and she is the most organized person that I know. That she has a specific spot for each thing. If she is out of town and I need to grab something from her house, she will tell me like what shelf it is and what it's behind, and can tell me these specific details of how she keeps her house, because she cannot function any other way, because she has to have a plan and a method in place or the wheels come off. So that is what works for her, is that level of detail. I could not tell you what's in my pantry right now. If I was out of town and was like, ooh, the dog thing is somewhere in my house. We're all different, and different things are going to meet our needs. When we're looking at what works for our kids, this is a great time to have lots of dialogue with your school team about what things to try and what things might work. I told you already, my daughter has a list of homework at the end of the day in her planner that has the circles on it that estimate how much time. And she's supposed to review the information from each class. She does that with support currently. And then our intention is for that to grow to her being able to have like steps that she breaks down that she goes through as a checklist on her own, where she's able to review it and somebody can check in with her. But that over time, her organization skills are growing. And that's kind of the goal really of teaching organization skills and providing organizational support, is figuring out what works for the individual and then how they can lean into that and how those supports can go with them. I worked with a family who had color-coded subject areas at school. So the teacher said purple is English and blue is math and yellow is social studies and green is science. And the student had folders for each of those colors, and the teacher made the handouts or the worksheets or the note paper or anything for each of those subjects on those colors of paper. So the student learned that the green paper goes in the green folder. And then they started having the student write science on the top of the green paper. And then the green paper still went in the green folder. And then eventually over time, the green paper was white, but the student already knew they were writing science at the top, and they knew that science went in the green folder. That same student utilized like transparent Post-it notes to be able to attach their own color coding and have their own organizational method that they were able to grow over multiple years, and how that evolved so that they had independent skills for organization to support their executive function. So it's a huge topic. There's thousands of different things we could try. And those are just a couple of examples of things that have worked for in my house or for other people for what organization can look like and how we can support our students. We're going to move into talking about executive function in the IEP. When we start talking about the IEP, we always start with thinking about the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And that is like the snapshot of right now for your student. That is where we're going to capture their strengths and weaknesses, what helps and hinders their learning, what their needs are, and some good data to support that information. And that's a spot where as parents, there's a lot of opportunity for us to have input in that present level. That's where we want to come to the team and say, I feel like my child is really struggling with organization. I feel like they're really struggling with emotional control. You can think of some of these types and talk about some examples and share that with the team of where your current struggles are or what you have found really works. Like when I talk to my team, you're going to be shocked. I tell them visuals work really well, that we need that concrete visual to lean into. And that's something that I tell, like we did camp this summer, and that's something that I told camp. They're like, ooh, there were a lot of objections when we weren't ready for a new activity. I'm like, yeah, we really are challenged with adapting and changing. If we know what to accept, that help, what to expect, that helps us, but we need that concrete visual to lean into. So talking with your team about your child and what you see and where you see struggles or where you see success and what helps is all information you want captured in your present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Where we usually see supports reflected or executive function in general reflected in the IEP is in goals and accommodations. They are not the same thing, and I want to make sure we talk a little bit about how they're not the same thing. That the goal is the skill or behavior that the student is going to learn in the year. And when we're thinking about goals, we want to make sure that we're teaching the tools for our kids to grow their skills to rely on independently. And the goal is a skill or behavior the student will learn. Accommodations are a type of supplementary aid that are provided to ensure the student has access. So those supports are to meet the need. It's not a skill or behavior being taught, it's access being provided. And I think that's a really important distinction when you're thinking about how executive function is supported in your own child's IEP. If you think of a student who uses a wheelchair to move around the building, you might think of ramps and elevator access as an accommodation. We're ensuring access. A goal might be endurance, independently navigating from the cafeteria to the gym in the building. And that may be a physical therapy goal for the student. When I was talking about my last example in organization, that student that was provided the accommodation of the colored papers to go in the folders had an accommodation that was provided to ensure access. And then over time, there was a goal where the skill was taught and there were independent skills or behavior the student was doing over time. So what starts as an accommodation can move into something that is a goal in the future, but we need to provide and figure out what works and then teach the tools. So some skills or behavior will be taught, those are the goals, and some will be provided to ensure access, those are the accommodations. And I think that's a really important distinction when you're thinking about how you see executive function in the IEP. Margarita, do you want to provide us a couple of examples of goals?
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, for explaining that between what is the difference between goals and accommodations. That is something that is very important for the parents to know. So let's talk about some examples. And the first example that reads, you can see them in the screen, and it says, the student will independently check backpack every day for papers, notebooks, books, and supplies needed to be prepared for class by the end of the school year. The skill is knowing what they need for each class and making sure that they have it. This could be a type of goal for working memory and organization. Number 2 reads, student will identify triggers and possible strategies for negative behavior with the teacher each day. This goal could address needs in self-monitoring, emotional control. Like I said before, when my son was younger, the teacher was the one seeing that my kid needed the break. But the more that we work with him and his self-monitoring and emotional control, he was able to recognize what things will trigger him and possible ways to cope. And this is the next step when the child is learning to identify and use strategies independently. We need to teach the kids how to do this, not just expect them to know, like all the examples that Stephanie and Andrea have given before. You send your kid to clean the room and they don't get it done. We have to teach them how to get things done. Number 3, given a complex task, the student will organize the task on paper, including the materials needed, the steps to accomplish the task, and a time frame. This goal could be appropriate for a child who struggles with task initiation or planning and prioritizing. A complex task can be very overwhelming, so the skill to teach the child how to see it in steps instead of one huge overwhelming thing. And this comes with the perfect example that Andrea gave about eating the whole brownie. Let's talk about food, you guys. It's very good, and it is true. Our kids could feel very overwhelmed with giving them a big task, but if we break it into pieces, they will be more willing to work with that. Our last goal is if a goal is not reached, the student will identify steps to improve progress towards meeting the goal. With this goal, we could help a child build skills with self-monitoring and flexible thinking. By looking at the goal that was not reached, we can consider things that could be done differently. And this allows the child to identify what works for him and what doesn't work.
Thanks, Margarita. Along with IEP goals, let's talk a little bit about common accommodations for executive functioning that can be included in your child's IEP. These are just examples, again, like we keep emphasizing that these things are very individualized, so not everything will work for everyone, but these are just some common accommodations that may help. Things like sequential directions using keywords like first we will do this, next we will do that, and last we will do this other thing. Having your child repeat those directions back to you is a way to confirm that they know what is supposed to happen. You can also use pictures or a checkoff list to find things to work more appropriately for your child. We're big visual learners here, so that makes a sense for a lot of us, but for some it may not. Break up or chunk large assignments into smaller bite-sized pieces. We kind of keep going into that one. Things like brain teasers or color coding or pneumatic devices. I still use please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for me to understand the order of operations in math. That's parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. As a band kid, I still remember fat cats go down alleys eating bugs is a way for you to remember different keys. So there's like, once you get those mnemonic devices, they stay with you forever. And things like calendars, planners, smart technology reminders, they can work independently or they can all work together to really help support as memory aids, and also to help curb impulses and to also stay on task. I like to practice the 3 R's of repetition, rehearsal, and review. Repeating like what's going to happen, doing rehearsal, which is a social story where you, in our house, we would act out, this is what is coming and this is what it looks like and this is how we respond, and then we would review, how do we feel about that? Do we feel like that worked? You know, what would we like to do differently? We still practice the 3 R's pretty regularly, and my kids are all out of high school, so these are all really good things to include as accommodations, and like we mentioned earlier, to work towards goals so that they can do them by themselves.
Thanks, Andrea. I think those are all good for getting the wheels turning on what things might look like or what might help our own individual kids. We've already shared the handout in the chat, and the handout really does just give you kind of like an overview of the big pieces that we talked about today, and then some additional resources for you to lean into to dive deeper, or if there's specific things that you saw today that you wanted to try and apply. There's some information on like how to build a picture schedule for a daily routine. There's a resource for that. There's also a really great PACER document in your handouts that's questions to ask the school about adaptations. That can be a really great conversation starter for how to begin to have the conversation with the rest of your team. So please take a look at those, and we hope they are useful. We do have a few minutes left. Are there any questions today?
Thank you, ladies. We do have a couple questions here. Thinking about the PLAF statement, and you mentioned, you would want to include some data. What kind of evaluation is done in regards to executive function deficits?
The tricky thing with all evaluations that gets complicated when we're talking with schools is that schools use different tools. So the best advice I would give when you're approaching your school is to provide examples of what it looks like in life and where you're seeing the struggles and what data you have from home. If you know that your child needs the steps for getting out the door, if you know your child needs the time expectations set to be able to transition from one task to another. They need first, next. What that looks like in your life is what you want to start to discuss when you're sharing with the team, and then talk about what evaluations would be appropriate. Like, one of the tricky things for evaluations is I was doing a training on evaluations and I wanted to provide something concrete, and I wanted to look at occupational therapy evaluations, and I looked it up, and there were over 200 options that could meet that specific target, that specific information that I was looking for. There are lots of tools out there. There's not one right tool, but helping the team understand what the struggle is and what you want to look at is going to help the team to decide what the best evaluations are, to collect more data and to see what it looks like. Andrea or Margarita, was there more you would want to add to that?
Mine goes along.
Yeah.
Mine goes a lot along with what you said. You see the examples in life. For us, it was when we saw that huge deficit in my daughter's math skills, and we did find out that it was because she sped along with it. But that led us to getting evaluations, and when we were doing the intake, we used that as one of the examples. And then that led to them doing testing on her, and we found out that's where we found out her verbal skills were great, but her problem solving and critical thinking skills were terrible. So it's real life examples that lead you to the next step along with evaluations, which whether that's a pediatrician or a neuropsychologist, it's like it goes in levels.
And it's kind of also important to see exactly where they're struggling at school. Why are they not doing their homework? Why are they not, if they're changing classroom, why is he not making it on time to the next classroom? With my son, if they will tell him, oh, you gotta color this picture, then cut it, and then go put it in your folder. He will just color it, and then he was like done, pacing around the classroom because he totally forgot what the next step was. So it was important for the teacher to make sure that when he was done coloring, they would let him know what was next, because if you give him 4 instructions, then he's totally lost.
And I know I already answered, but I just want to say sometimes we need to make sure we're shifting the conversation with the team from that our students won't do things to that they can't do things and that they need more support to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important dialogue to have with the team of okay, so we're struggling with this. I want to what do we think the hurdles are? How do we start to address it?
Thank you, ladies. Next question. Can somebody repeat and explain again what those 3 R's, what that stands for?
Let me pull it up so I have it right, because it's repeat, rehearse, and review. So that's what I have it as. Let me make sure that I have that right. Yeah, repetition, rehearsal, and review. So it's repeating it and having them repeat it back to you, like this is what we're doing. And then rehearsal, that's practice with social stories. I think social stories help everyone. This is a situation that we're going into that maybe you're unfamiliar with. Somebody might come up to you and say this, how do you respond? And so you practice that. That's the rehearsal. And then after that's all done, after the experience is over, after the class is over, whatever's happened, check back in with your child and be like, how did it go? What do you think worked? What do you think didn't work? And if they're just like, I just got really stuck, Mom, you might realize that this would be where a visual aid might help them to be like, if you're here, like draw the map. So those 3 R's I think are really helpful, and they're things that you can definitely put in an IEP. You know, that the child has to repeat the directions back to you. So you might not use them all in one time, but you'll use them all in one day.
Thank you. Andrea, can you repeat the math pneumatic device that you use?
Oh,
Sally?
please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, which is parentheses, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. I did that without looking because I still literally use that. I always stuck with me. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. If you see Facebook and they have like, what's the answer to this? And everybody has one answer, it's because they didn't use that mnemonic device and they messed up the exponents almost every time.
All right, next question. Thinking about tools that students might use, do you have suggestions or thoughts on using paper organizers versus electronic organizers?
Totally individualized to the person. And I would try them both and see what connects more with your student. There is definitely data out there that says writing things down by hand helps us retain information. And there's absolutely evolution occurring within our society and education that we can capture things more quickly with technology. And we have all sorts of different ways to capture things with technology. So if we struggle with fine motor, but we don't even need to try that one. We don't need to make it frustrating to try and figure out the tool. So figuring out what tool most meets your own individual student's need.
Something that worked for my son was like, now that he was transitioning to 6th grade, I took him just to look to the store to see different type of notebooks, different type of folders, so he could just pick what he wanted, because what I thought it was going to work, it was not that, you know. So instead of him having like a huge binder, he only wanted one notebook that it divides for all the subjects, but it was just one notebook, and he didn't want the bulky thing with a bunch of papers and all that stuff. It was like too much for him, and it worked great. And I just took him that day. I did not take him to the store for anything else, but just to go there, focus, so he's not overwhelmed, and, you know, show him the different type of options that he had. And once he touch them, carry them, and see them, he chose what it worked best for him, and it did. I was actually surprised, because that I didn't want him to get that. You know, I wanted him to get the school binder that has pockets in it and all this stuff, but that was like too much for him. So it's important that the kids, if they're capable, you know, like to choose what works for them and to listen what they really need and want.
Or to make it interesting. I know it worked for us when my daughter was little. Scented markers. So for her to use scented markers on a planner was something that, like, if we made that so that was strictly the only thing she could use on her planner, it made her want to put things down on her planner. And so if you can find something that inspires them to use a tool that's really scratch and sniff stickers or colored, like whatever it is, very individualized, but if you can find something that makes it interesting or fun, it's a way to make that tool more useful.
Thank you. Along those same lines, thinking about all of the different apps and other things on the computer, how would a parent go about sorting through those, deciding on which app, and obtaining the deciding on the device or app, and then also obtaining the skills to use that device or app?
Test drive. I'm a big proponent of, I want to try it first, because I want to try to, I think you're looking at it from an adult standpoint of, is this safe? Is it usable? Or is it going to be a distraction? So I think test driving it yourself, and if it's not that my technology is better than my kids, because I guarantee it's not, but I think I can find maybe the pitfalls a little bit quicker than they will. And as they get older, it can be more of a collaborative effort, but I think test driving it is the best way to figure out, is this a good tool? Or is it going to be a distraction? Or is it just not going to be, it'll be fun, but not useful?
I would also lean into your school team that ask, absolutely, I think ask multiple viewpoints. That I had a long-term goal for my child that she was going to communicate things with us in different ways, and she uses an AAC device to talk, and I wanted her to be able to text or email or write and have different ways to be able to tell us things and not be limited to one mode. And we had done this worksheet at school where like she circled what she ate for lunch and what special she went to and had finite choices, but she was communicating her own perspective another way. And we wanted to have that evolve and have it be something different. And it was a conversation that we had as an IEP team where the teacher was like, I don't know what that next step is. And I didn't know what the next step was. But her occupational therapist said her device can email, her device can text. She can make her sentences still in her talker in the tool that she already knows and still communicate it in another way. She can text you during the school day like every other kid her age is texting during the school day. And I didn't know the technology we already had, the app we were already using could do that, but leaning into my team revealed some of those pieces. So I would always consult other trusted members of your team as well, because they work with a lot of kids. They have a lot of experience in different apps.
Would that sort of tool be considered assistive technology?
My specific example is definitely assistive technology. Most of our examples are assistive technology. That assistive technology is anything that helps someone with a disability accomplish a task, but it can't be another human. So like a scribe or someone reading to them, another human is not assistive technology. But like this pencil grip on this pencil that changes how I position my fingers is assistive technology. It does not need to be high tech to be assistive technology.
Thank you for that. It is 1 o'clock. We do have some other questions that we didn't make it to in the chat. So if we didn't get to your specific question, or if it wasn't totally about executive function, no worries. You can connect with us after the webinar by emailing us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. If you include your school district, that'll make it just all that much quicker that we can connect you with our staff person in your part of the state. So thank you so much to our presenters for being here today. Thank you for everybody for logging in and joining us. Follow us here on social media. Visit our website for more information. One more shout out to our post-webinar survey that I'll drop in the chat one more time. If you can fill that out, it helps us improve the work that we do and gives us something to report back to our funders. I encourage everybody to come back next week for our webinar, preparing to go back to school on the right foot, and that one is for youth and young adults. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and we're Michigan's federally funded parent training and information center. Call us 1-800-552-4821 or email us info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Thank you. Have a great day and hope to see you next week.